You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 6th of August. Nothing to celebrate, 1 year on from last year's summer's riots. Yet another illegal to have cushy time in our jails on our money. Greece has rounded up illegal immigrants and will deport them. Hostages being held by Syrian rebels are Iranian soldiers, they claim. Memorial Day in Japan for the 67th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. Thought for the day, why are we the drug capital of Europe? And finally, Olympic buildings leaking in biblical storms. UK news. It is 1 year since the summer, or rather race riots in Britain. These started when police shot and killed Mark Duggan, who was black, in Tottenham. This caused our enrichers to blame the police officer involved because he was white. This, the web and Twitter, provided a good excuse for the following days of smashing shop windows and looting. Left-wing anarchists also seized their chance by setting fire to buildings and vehicles in a bid to cause further trouble in Britain. The lefties failed due to people protecting their properties and chasing after them as they fled on bikes whilst hooded and fully masked. One World at 8 reporter commented, "While the enrichers looted our great cities, the left-wing anarchists burnt people's properties. That is the difference between the two evils in Britain today, but both ganged together to cause division within decent British people." Yet another illegal faces a 2-year sentence at the expense of the British taxpayer. Tone Viet Guyan, who entered Britain illegally, was hiding out in a cannabis factory. The drugs den was raided by police and they apprehended the criminal. The factory was in the city now lost to immigration and a soaring non-white birth rate, Leicester. A World at 8 reporter commented, "It is simple. If you want to stay in Britain and get immunity, commit a crime. The worse the crime, the longer you stay in a nice comfortable prison with all amenities. Why do we think these criminals come here? For the weather? They should be deported without trial or question." Euronews. Greece has had enough of the migrants coming into its country from Asia and Africa. 2,000 police officers and border control agents gathered in Athens to crack down on mass immigration caused by Greece entering the EU. Like all countries in Europe, the Marxists have made sure that each European country gets enough Asians and Africans in its population to destroy the indigenous peoples of Europe. 1,130 Asians and Africans were captured and detained in a country which cannot afford such an operation. The police say they are to be immediately deported, but say the immigrants will make every effort to return under a false name. Far-right groups in Greece said, "Greek jobs for Greek workers." A World at 8 writer commented, and how right they are, but it is more likely that these non-Europeans will pass through Greece in the future and head straight for the target of soft-touch, politically correct and bankrupt Britain. We, like Greece, cannot afford these people because they do cost us money. Once here they need food, housing, education and health care. That is why they come to Europe. World news. 48 hostages being held in Syria being claimed as Iranian military. The hostages are being held by the rebels who claim that they are Iranian soldiers who have been involved with helping President Assad. The Iranian government has denied that all the hostages are military and from Iran. They want the hostages released unharmed. It is the 67th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. The Japanese marked the anniversary with a bell which marked the start of a 1-minute silence at 08:15 local time, 23:15 GMT, when the US bomber Enola Gay dropped the bomb that killed 140,000 people. The son of the late US President Harry Truman was there to pay his respects to the dead, and Mayor Kazumi Matsui called for a nuclear-free world at the event at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. A World at 8 writer commented, "It may sound awful now, but at that time it seemed to be the only way to stop Japan taking over the Far East and the South Pacific. Just as we needed the Americans to win the European war, that bomb was needed to send Japan a message. Wish it did. But I concur with Mayor Kazumi that the atomic bomb should never be used again." 48 people have been killed in Yemen by an Al-Qaeda suicide bomber. The bombing took place at a funeral which killed a tribal chief and 45 other innocent people who were just paying their respects by attending. The evil Al-Qaeda admitted the killing of innocent people by an email to various sources. Thought for the day: why have we become the drug capital of Europe? In this thought I'm including alcohol as well. Now I like a large glass of red wine or two. I find it helps me relax, and I may be kidding myself, but red wine is good for you, isn't it? Well, not by the barrel maybe, but nevertheless. I personally did not drink really until I was in my late 30s and have been making up for that ever since. But alcohol has become the new drug of choice amongst the Silver Brigade apparently, and they're suffering for it, along with a rising rate of HIV and sexually related diseases, so it must really relax some people. But England is now the drug and alcohol capital of Europe, and there must be a reason why. If you look at some of the headlines in the papers you will see: Albanian weightlifter banned from Olympics for drug use, 15-year-old girl died after taking ecstasy from teacher's flat, members of a Vietnamese drug gang who ran sophisticated cannabis farms across Tyneside have been jailed. Europe is the biggest consumer of heroin, with 26% of the world's supply being used each year. But Britain is by far the worst consumer in Europe, with 415,000 known addicts. Our teenage female drinkers heaviest in Europe. And so on and so on. Awful headlines. Headlines that Hogarth would have used in his drawings of Gin Lane in the 7 Ages of Cruelty. And one must say, although drinking and drugs of a sort have been with us as long as the poor, they have not been so well distributed and organised as nowadays. Now it is big business. Very big business, and if you look at the roots of most of these drugs you will see who has a hand in the bringing in, growing, smuggling and distribution of drugs, what these drugs can do or allow to happen, and the usual sad ending to a terrible tale. I would be taking all night if I went into great detail on every single drug or drink available, so I'll be concentrating on just 3: alcohol, marijuana and heroin. The awful and addictive man-made drugs from China, the Far East, America and courtesy of chemists everywhere need no publicity. They kill. It is as simple as that. And if they do not kill the recipient, they kill their family, their culture and the society they live in. Alcohol. Well, the Brits have always loved their beer, but now that has extended from the no women pubs and working man's Friday night booze-ups to first wine bars and now most restaurants and clubs that are licensed. To make things worse, Labour actually increased drinking hours for pubs whilst cutting out smoking. This means if you go to a pub, drink will cost more because less people will be going because of the smoking ban, so thrusting the main call on drink to corner shops, Asian owned, and supermarkets, Jewish owned. It is well known that the corner shops have been selling to underage drinkers in many areas for years, and now that shops like Threshers do not hold a monopoly on drink or the hours one can drink, it is open season for youngsters. In my day, wine was not fashionable with the masses. I grew up with hard liquor around in drink cabinets but rarely touched, apart from high days and holidays. There were drinking clubs for those who needed it, pubs kept reasonable working hours, restaurants were often not licensed, and there was the traditional opening hours for shops like Threshers. There were no supermarkets, and when they were introduced in London in the early 60s, booze was not sold during certain hours. Corner shops were run by locals for sweets and papers, not booze and drugs. There was always drink, but it was in its place. Now what should be done is stop supermarkets selling alcohol altogether, stop licensing corner shops to sell alcohol, re-establish shops designated to sell alcohol only during certain hours, cut down the hours clubs can sell alcohol to youngsters, bring back smoking rooms for pubs. It would bring back customers, beer would reduce in price and heavy drinking would be monitored as it was 20 years ago. I'm not anti-booze by any means, but when something ceases to be a pleasure and becomes a social burden, it is necessary to call time. Marijuana. Well, now we have it. A herb. We now have hordes of Far Eastern illegal immigrants being brought in as gardeners to grow thousands of pounds worth of these plants for sale. There is a market for these people to make money out of our people yet again. It is mainly the Vietnamese and Filipinos on this one. What would I do? Legalise it. Take it out of the hands of foreigners and illegals. Prescribe it for those people who need it. It is a proved pain reliever for MS, arthritis and much more. The government could outsource it, farm it and pack it and sell it. And best of all, tax it. Records would be kept. Most drugs lose their attractiveness if legalised. All things lead to other things in the right person. You cannot stop people killing themselves. They do it by smoking tobacco and drinking, but rarely smoking cannabis. Now the biggie, heroin. I was handed a leaflet by Tony Bamber on the heroin trade and was shocked to learn that the Americans have not burnt the poppy fields in Afghanistan. Why? Apparently they do not want to deprive the poor farmers from making a living. Yup, pull the other one. This is a case where socially and on a worldwide scale the Muslims have created and cashed in on yet another evil to be perpetrated on the Western world. I was talking about corner shops earlier, and of course crack can be funnelled through these shops as well as restaurants, takeaways and petrol stations if Muslim owned. Tony quotes from a Preston prostitute. They, meaning Muslims, have all the post offices, taxi firms, chemists and God knows what else. Who knows how much of this is paid for by smack money, but I do know with my habit I must have paid for that new mosque all on its own. Yeah, the bastards should put something back for the lives they've destroyed. Now this isn't a hymn of hate against Muslims, but it is against the Muslims whose family business from Afghanistan to Leeds is to import and distribute hard drugs to school children, as in our sexual grooming cases. They do not get their own hooked on it or alcohol because it isn't in their culture to imbibe it, but they are certainly not above selling it to our kids. The British spend £2.1 billion every year on smack, which shows how lucrative business is now, doesn't it? Every mosque, every new madrasa, every new Islamic centre, every post office, petrol station, corner shop, takeaway, restaurant could be the result of some poor smackhead's habit. I believe key Muslims are in cahoots with our governments, no matter who they are, to get the entire population of Britain either hooked on heroin, drunk and incapable, or in the case of cannabis really loved up, because an inert population is easy to manipulate. Our recessions have bred in us the need for money, and remember it is the love of money that is evil, not money itself. And yet here we are furnishing an entire foreign nation with money in exchange for what? In the case of heroin, death. The trouble is that many of the foreigners who distribute heroin are in high places in the establishment. No one would dare touch them, as indeed the Muslim sexual grooming has proved. We are not talking about some dreadlocked illiterate West Indian high on his ganja in a squat. We are talking about organised, well-funded drug pushing here. Tony Bamber believes it should be decriminalised. I'm not sure. It might draw it out and it will certainly take huge amounts of money away from the Muslim communities, but would they stand for that? I do not think so. It could start something like the Opium Wars in China with the Boxer Rebellion. This is one drug that would take a complete turnaround on behalf of not only the police, but the customs and immigration people. Stop all immigration and start repatriating, and that would be a start. It would also take rethinking from the British themselves. It would appear that not only are we British funding Afghanistan and the Third World to come over here, but we are also giving huge amounts of money to these people who really only want to kill us. And if we can do it for them and pay for the privilege, then who are they to argue? What do you want your money to do? Give it to the local pub or club? Hand over thousands to a local hospice or animal shelter? Buy booze and get totally ratted on a regular basis? I can concur with that one. Or just give it away to someone who has about as much respect for you that he will sell you death in a packet, and sell it to your child as well. And finally, huge storms have already left parts of Britain underwater, with driving rain, thunder and lightning forcing thousands of Olympic spectators to run for cover and threatening several key events on day 9 of the Games. By this afternoon, leaks had emerged in the velodrome roof under heavy rain as Team GB prepared to perform. At Wimbledon Centre Court, spectators also reported rainwater dripping on their heads and seats as a result of the weather. Officials at the velodrome are now investigating whether droplets of water, which were spotted on the ground in several parts of the venue, could affect today's cycling. Funny, I thought we'd cornered the storms of biblical proportions in Blackpool some weeks ago in our Justice for Charlene demos. I'm so glad it has extended to this fiasco. Just proves we should all have English builders, shouldn't we? By the way, the forecast is rain for today as well. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart. I wish you all a very good night.